So I think maybe this isn't the experience for every single therapist, but I think many of us can relate to the idea that in our work, we hear things and we see things and we experience things that other people don't. And for me, that was most true in my first job right out of graduate school. I began doing a type of therapy called multisystemic therapy. I don't know if anyone has heard of multisystemic therapy, just and kind of gauge the room. One person has one finger up. Anybody done? See a couple more hands up. Anybody done multisystemic therapy? Been a multisystemic therapist? They don't want to admit it. It was, I saw a lot, heard a lot, experienced a lot in that job. It's a very evidence-based program. Tremendous amount of research undergirds this program. My understanding in talking to some of the higher up people within the multisystemic national organization is that the National Institute of Mental Health told them, we are not funding any more research. You've done it, you've proved it, you've done the efficacy studies, you've done the effectiveness studies, you've done the feasibility studies, you are better than treatment as usual, you save states and cities money working with juvenile delinquents who, if they don't get MST, will just continue to offend and offend and offend and will rack up a lot more charges for the state. So it's this extremely evidence-based program, but it's also very intensive and in-home. So you get a lot of street credibility when you're an MST therapist. Remember the very first session I went out to, I was shadowing another therapist as part of the onboarding process, and I went to meet with this family, and I'm watching the therapist talk with the family, and the identified client, this teenage boy, was not home. He had run away. He had court coming up in a couple of days, so we wanted to get him home. And I'm watching the therapist kind of talk with this mother. What was going on, before he left? Do you know where he is? What are those parents like? He's just asking some questions. And as he does this, a live duck walked into the middle of the room. It crapped on the carpet and then waddled out. And that was kind of emblematic of this family, I think. That was just the boundaries were not set. They're pretty permeable. Kids, pets, and farm animals just kind of got to do what they wanted. And it was our job as MST therapists to impose some structure there. But that was by far probably one of the tamest things that I saw. I had kids posture up on me. They were going to fight me. I was helping their parents grow a backbone and put some structure in the home, and they did not like that. So get a kid posturing up on you, and you've got to talk your way out of that. I had guns pointed at me by the police, who were pointing them at somebody else who just happened to be on the other side of me, but that was an interesting situation. Watched this cholo walk behind me, and I don't know if you guys have cholos here. Mexican gang members with shorts down to here, and they pull their socks up, and there's a certain kind of Nike tennis shoe that they wear that represents their gang colors, and these tats on his face and stuff. So I saw him walk by, and I was just keeping an eye on him. He went behind me, and I was glad that he went behind me and was passing. So I went back to look at the young woman I was talking to, and that's when I saw the two police officers with their guns drawn, pointed at this guy, and we're right in the middle. So if he had decided to challenge them, that would have been an uncomfortable situation. And then, the home hygiene in some of the homes we went to was incredibly smelly. And a lot of MST therapists had procedures that they would use to make sure that they didn't carry that smell home with them. So even though it was very intense, I did learn a lot. I call it therapy boot camp, really. I learned so much trying to get parents who maybe were not interested in parenting their kids to be parents for their kids. You learn a lot in that situation. And my goal today is to share that with you. Get my timer out here. Is to share that with you without you having to go through any of those experiences. So no ducks crapping on the carpet, no guns pointed at you, no smells that you don't want to take home. And I'm going to combine that with some of inpatient and outpatient counseling that I've done, and some of the things that I've learned in resilient recovery as well. So my goal is to just kind of share that information with you. And I'm thinking of this sort of as a quest, that we will go on a quest together, and I will lead you away from the things that certainly do not help and probably make things worse. There's a fancy word they use in research, iatrogenic effects, when the treatment you're using actually makes the client worse. There are things that we routinely do in substance use treatment that is iatrogenic. So we want to avoid that. We want to avoid things that are simply useless, and I want to point you towards the things that are useful. And we'll have, there's my quest imagery there. At the end of this, you'll have 2 tactics that come from MST that help develop a sober plan. And you'll also have kind of a 9-point checklist that you can use to look at your own treatment and decide, am I on track or am I off track with the treatment that I'm doing? So the first thing that we definitely want to do on this trek is avoid the haunted forest of scare tactics. And that is often used in drug and alcohol treatment. What are scare tactics? Well, public service campaigns, health campaigns like this one. It says, I think on a train, it says the heroin trap. Once you're in, there's no way out. And we do this all the time. There were curriculum in high schools that talk to you about the health risks of using and describe to you what happens if you use some of these substances. Even in our conversations sometimes, we just kind of go into a mode of informing somebody and warning them of what's going to happen if they continue down this road. And it most certainly does not work. And the reason for that is some people are attracted to things that are dangerous or inadvisable or just a bad idea. I think this is especially true for teenagers, which is kind of when a lot of substance abuse starts. They have a desire for novel experiences. They want to do something new that kind of tests their mettle. They want to show what they're made of, and they also, it's really important to go through these experiences with other people so that we can have gone through an ordeal together, and now we're kind of bonded by that. I think this is most exemplified in the area of war stories. You go to any AA meeting, they're going to tell you, please don't tell war stories. And war stories are when we talk about substance abuse in a way that glorifies it or glorifies me or talks about how crazy I was when I did this thing or that thing. You can kind of think of knights sitting around a table and they're telling the stories of the fights that they had last year. And maybe even they tell the story of somebody who tripped and fell and they're laughing at him, but he's part of the group and we're all bonding around that. I talked to a guy that came to Resilient for quite a while, and he was in sales. The corporate culture of his company was to wine and dine clients and then give them a sales presentation the next day. The wining and dining happened at strip clubs. And you can imagine this scene where people are ordering the most expensive thing, right? Bring that around, give everybody shots, and they're ingesting this poison, and everybody's going, whole hog, getting really hammered. But what made you a standout in that company is if you got blackout drunk the night before and then got up and gave that presentation and landed the client. That was, you got a high five by the water cooler for that kind of behavior. So imagine what it does when you tell that person, drinking's very bad for you. It's very dangerous. It actually fits into what the image that they're trying to project, that I can drink the poison and live. I can go out and have a crazy night and I can still get up the next morning and give my presentation. You actually kind of fed into something that they want to do. I also had an experience where I was taking 2 native guys home after a Resilient meeting. And they're sitting in my truck, and the guy next to me, Rudy, is telling me about when he drank bong water from a meth pipe. So I'd explain what a bong was to my wife. Not sure everybody knows this, but it's a pipe. There's a chamber in the pipe that has water in it. And when you draw on the pipe, it draws the smoke through the water, and it cools the smoke down so you can get more in your lungs and you get a better high. But as you do that, little, microscopic particles of the drug are getting mixed in with that water. And so you use this thing for a while and it turns an interesting color and it is full of meth at that point. Very, very bad idea to drink this. You have no idea what the dosage is going to be, but it's going to be high. So he's telling me this story and he's telling me, yeah, I ended up in the ER with a big smile on his face. My blood pressure was, and I forget what the number was, but it was not consistent with life. And then the same thing with his heart rate. It was astoundingly high, right? And he's telling me, yeah, this white doctor is like, you Indians can take anything. You should be stroking out right now. And he's not telling me this in a sense of repentance and concern about what a foolish thing he's done. And then in the back seat, Verdell Standing Bear goes, I drank the bong water once too. They know it's dangerous. Us telling them it's dangerous doesn't help. It actually makes it more attractive to a certain group of individuals that wants to push the limits. So we really want to avoid these scare tactics. That's Mike Watt, by the way, the best punk rock bassist ever. I put that in there because it reminds me of my time when I had a similar mindset. The other reasons not to use scare tactics is that when we use them, we can initiate in someone the fight, flight, or freeze response. This is connected to survival. When you use a substance for a while, your body wants to stay in homeostasis. A proper amount of anxiety versus calm. You want to have a proper temperature and so on. You do the drug and it tilts the balance towards the side of pleasure. And then when the drug goes away, it tilts back to the side of pain. You get a headache, you get a dry mouth, you get irritable, your head, your stomach is upset. And then after a while, it will go back to normal. But if you do it enough, what happens is it gets stuck on this side of pain. And now you need to do the drug. Maybe if you do enough of it, you can feel a little bit of pleasure, but some people are just kind of hoping to get to normal. And being at homeostasis is connected to survival. So if you're coming at someone with scare tactics and telling them, I'm going to take your drugs away from you, that's my purpose today, they're going, oh, crap. You're trying to kill me. Like, it can feel that way. The drive to get drugs is related to that drive for survival when you become so dependent upon a substance. So there's certainly a biological reason why we don't want to up the ante and make people more scared. There's also a psychological reason. We're created to have dominion over things, including ourselves. We're created to have dignity and to make choices. And when we come in so strong as an expert and we tip our hand so far in the direction of change, you make people feel like when a salesperson comes up and you don't really want to buy the thing, you have techniques to get away from that. I'm going to shut down. I'm just going to wave you away. I'm not going to show up to the next appointment. But people want to have autonomy in what they do. And when we come in with the scare tactics, we're threatening that. And so we definitely don't want to use scare tactics. Now, there might be some folks here that are thinking that's I know that. I know don't scare the client, but I find that I do it all the time. There's these 12 kind of roadblocks to listening. They're just behaviors that involve not listening. Some of them are kind of benign. I want to share with you some resources. I want to call your attention to the moral difficulties of what you're doing. I do this stuff all the time. The 12 roadblocks to listening are in any standard course on motivational interviewing. But if you put a recorder around my neck when I'm talking to people, I'm using all of these all the time. And the only way that I can actually focus my attention and just use ORs, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries is almost to use mindfulness, to focus on, okay, I am not going to use any of these 12. I'm just going to use these 4 behaviors. If you're not watching yourself, you're certainly using them. So I'm not going to go through each one of these. I think if not scare tactics, what do we want? There's kind of a sweet spot that we want to be in when we're talking to someone who has an addiction. And we definitely don't want to be the dictator, right? That's going to activate the fight, flight, or freeze. But laissez-faire is no good either. If my only comment to you is, well, you got to do whatever you want, man. You get San Francisco or Portland, or you want to steal $600 worth of stuff from a store? All right. Want some clean needles? Here you go. And harm reduction has its place, but when there's no structures and no rules, that's not what we want. The same in terms of being curious versus being an expert. We want to be a little bit more curious than being an expert. But it's not that we don't have expertise. You can think of this as being a little bit like a guide. You've got a guide that's showing you through a city. That guide isn't going to tell you, these are the 5 spots you will go to. You will spend 30 minutes here, 40 minutes here. The guide should talk to you and find out, what is it that you want to do? What kind of things do you like? And then kind of negotiate with you what you're going to do. The same thing happens with, for example, a really good waiter at a really good restaurant will just kind of explain the menu to you, ask if you have any questions, find out what you like and what you don't like. And at the end of that conversation, you're going to eat the meal, but it's going to be a better decision than if you hadn't talked to that waiter. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to do when we're talking to someone who has an addiction. Ultimately, they're going to have to eat whatever they choose off the menu, but I'll help you. I'll help you walk through the menu. I'll share with you the knowledge that I have. And I'm going to ask you a lot about kind of what your preferences are. So to get to that guide-like or that waiter-like spot, I encourage you all to create a change card. And a change card is it can be a business card, it can be a Post-it, but you just write in there, when I notice, and whatever that thing is that you notice. It could be, you just kind of notice what motivational interviewing calls the writing reflex, where when you see a boat and it's tilted to the side, you just kind of want to see it go straight again and not capsize. You might just kind of feel that feeling as you're talking to somebody that, this guy, I don't want to see him continue to go the direction he's going. I'm feeling the writing reflex. That might be what you notice. Okay, I'm getting off track. You might notice one of the 12 roadblocks. You might notice that you're using a scare tactic. You might notice things in the client as well. You might notice they're not engaged. They're not showing up to session. They're not doing the work. I'm getting a sense that we're kind of at loggerheads here. They're doing a lot of yeah buts to me. So when I notice that, then I'm going to do something different. And I would suggest you use one of the ors and write down exactly what it's going to be, because in the moment that you notice it is not when you want to make the decision about what change to make. You want to know ahead of time, what is it I'm going to go to when I notice this thing that's off track? So open-ended questions, that's a great thing to go to. Okay, I notice we're getting off track. Just going to ask a few open-ended questions. Another really good thing to go to, particularly in this scenario where we're starting to get at loggerheads a bit with a client, is to affirm their autonomy. So it's a particular kind of affirmation where you just, you tell the person, as you thank you for saying that. And as I listening and reflecting on this conversation, I'm reminded that this is really, it's your decision to make. And just let that hang. See what they say next. Or you could say, you know what, I didn't go into sales for a reason. I don't like to tell people what to do. That's not why I got into this job. And I recognize that even in your case, if I wanted to change you, I can't. Once you leave the session, you're going to do what you want to do. So, I hope that the rest of our conversation can be one in which we just kind of explore these topics together. So I would suggest, whether it's a little business card or a Post-it note, you have it somewhere where you can see it. People often don't make these changes unless they're reminded in the moment to make that change. So the other area that we really want to avoid is the swamp of epidemics. And this is another tactic that we use. Very, very common. We hear about an increase in the incidence or the prevalence of substance use, and we want to go warn people about it. Oh my gosh, do you know what's going on with fentanyl right now? In our area, do you know what's going on in 51st Avenue and Baseline right now? Do you know how many overdoses there are? It's a natural thing to want to do. The problem is that human beings use a lot of shortcuts when they're thinking, and they use popularity to decide if something is good. And we're telling people everybody's doing it. So think about if there's an abandoned mine shaft on the edge of town, and all the junior high boys ride their bikes over there in the afternoon, and they take the boards off and they try and go down the abandoned mine shaft, and we tell them, first of all, it's dangerous. Well, yeah, I want to go now. And then we tell them all your buddies are doing it. I mean, it's the perfect 1-2 punch in terms of advertising for a certain type of person. And you see this, advertisers know this. They'll put on the cover of a book, 1 million sold. We're more likely to buy it. Amazon will put on a product. This is our best-selling garage light or whatever it is, right? On a menu, our most popular item. They sell more of those items when people understand that this is a popular thing to do. We have in Arizona a petrified forest. I haven't been there, but I understand it's trees that have turned into rocks. And people like to go and look at the petrified forest. They had a problem with tourists taking the rocks as souvenirs and taking them home. So they put up this great sign. Your heritage is being vandalized every day by theft losses of petrified wood of 14 tons a year, mostly a small piece at a time. What do you think happened after they put the sign up? It's like, oh, everybody's doing it? I better get in on that quick. Yeah, so I think those are the two most common things that we do, though. We try and scare people, and we try and tell them there's a scary wave of this going on. It has the opposite effect. So what should we do instead? In using that kind of guiding and waiter-like stance, I think it's a good idea to just get some normative data on somebody. Let's do a little bit of an assessment. And introducing an assessment, I think there's probably a good way and a bad way to do that. John Gottman has studied couples for a long time. He's got basically a bed and breakfast that he brings couples into, and he hooks them up to a bunch of stuff, and he just watches them have conversations. And he claims that he can predict with 90% accuracy who's going to be divorced within 5 years based on the communication tactics that they use. But he also says that how a conversation starts predicts how it will end 90% of the time. So if we start a conversation with, dude, what you're doing is going to kill you, and I'm scared because all my clients are doing this, it's likely that that conversation is going to end up at loggerheads. If we start the conversation, by contrast, with that kind of waiter-like and guiding stance, we're way more likely to have a good outcome at the end of that conversation. So I suggest that you have kind of a routine and a pattern that you use when you bring out the assessments. You can use this format. It's just a calm tone, and you give a rationale, because if you're ever going to ask anybody to do something, you should tell them why you're doing it, and make sure that that rationale is factual, not inflammatory, and then immediately go into a permission. How do you feel about doing that? So on this paper it says, you've mentioned drinking today. I'd like to explore a little bit more with a tool that I use. How do you feel about that? It gives why we're doing it, and it puts the ball in their court. There's a few more examples here of things that you could use. Maybe you have information from a third party, and that's why you're doing it. Maybe they have depression or anxiety, and we know as therapists that alcohol interacts with that. Alcohol is a depressant, so if you're depressed and you're drinking, you're really depressed. If you have a lot of anxiety and you drink, you can suppress it for a while, but get ready for the panic attack that's going to take place once the alcohol wears off. So if we hear someone talking about anxiety and depression, and maybe they're talking about drinking, we give that as a rationale. I know that these things interact. How do you feel if we took a little survey? give us some information to talk about. And I think it's fair to ask, how is this different from the scare tactics? I think a couple of ways it's different. One is it's what the client said and what the client reported. So in a sense, we're asking their input and we're just reflecting back to them what they've told us. So it's based on their information. Secondly, the information, the feedback that we're giving them, it's from a third party. It's not me. So instead of you and me having a disagreement about whether or not your drinking is out of control, we're looking at this third-party document. Now, you don't have to literally pull your chair side by side with someone, but that's kind of the attitude. When we're presenting the results, what do you think of this? What are your thoughts? Share with me what you're thinking. And so we're sitting together and the person's telling me what they think about it. Then I'm not the one using the scare tactics, but I'm drawing out from them what their thoughts are. This is a screening that I like to use. It's certainly not the only one. We used this at our church. Our pastor preached on substance abuse. And then afterwards, we did this with everyone. It was in the bulletin. And that QR code goes to a website where they can take the same survey anonymously on a website, but it gives you a paragraph of feedback. Whereas the paper itself, it just kind of gives you some categories and tells you what the risk level is. So I took this as myself at somewhere between the ages of 19 and 23, and I got a score of 23, which is a high risk. It shows that I was likely to have alcohol dependence. Well, that's why my hand was shaking at 5 o'clock every evening. But the good thing is the information is very clear. It gives you some actionable items that you could do, and it's not coming directly from you. We had a woman at our church take this survey, and she just said, I don't like my score. And she's been coming to Resilient for 2 years. She's been sober that whole time now. And after church, I think we had probably a dozen people come up and ask for prayer for family members or that they were going through things. A simple survey can kind of come in under the radar, and it can allow you to have a conversation that you wouldn't have had otherwise. For teens, I'm just going to kind of flip through these resources. The websites and links are on the slides, and you guys will get a copy of these slides. It's a very similar kind of a survey, though, but it's for children. As step one is you just kind of ask about their drinking. Step two, it has a risk assessment. You can show them where their drinking is on that chart. And then step three, it gives you some words that you can say in terms of how risky their drinking is. And then Professor Sigelko and I both use similar data. I have a slightly different chart that I use, but this is data on average drinking in the United States of America. And it can be very, very telling when someone sees that they're on the high end of this chart. Have you guys seen a chart similar to this or used a chart similar to this? I'm seeing, yeah. So you can just kind of walk them through it. Look, the first three deciles, people aren't drinking at all. Like most people aren't drinking in the last week. That's kind of astounding to someone who's in a culture where there's a lot of drinking. And then as you can see, it's kind of that Pareto distribution where it's just the top 20% of people are doing the drinking for everybody. But it can be very, very informative, and you're just pointing to them on the line kind of where their drinking is and what do they think of that. For the teens, there's some charts as well. Turns out drinking is actually very uncommon for teens. As much as they'll protest that everybody's drinking at my school, it's not that common. It says past month drinking for boys and girls, and you can see even for the girls that are drinking more, 85% are not. The most popular thing to do is not drink. Binge drinking as well. You can look at the slides later. It's also low. This one has drinks in the past month, been drunk, binge drinking, daily drinking, all very, very low. And then this one's kind of cool because it shows that it's low, but it's also going down over time. Kids are drinking less now than they ever have. This chart gives a little bit of the same information, but it's about lifetime drinking. Have you ever drunk? But I'm certain if you guys have shown this to people, you've had some clients question the data. I've seen people say, well, who took these? Who took these surveys? They're lying. These are Americans. If I was in France, I'd be normal. So you definitely get some kickback from people, and that's normal. I think one of the reasons that the stats seem wrong is that drinking is very memorable. Again, we use shortcuts to think things through. We don't actually do a study every time we make a decision. Just go, oh, this restaurant reviewed by a lot of people as being very well. We go to that restaurant. And the availability heuristic is a shortcut in thinking that we use to determine how likely something is to happen. This is the classic scenario. Somebody watches the movie Jaws 3 days before they go on spring break to Florida. What are they thinking when they step in the water? There's sharks everywhere. The person who didn't watch Jaws, probably not thinking about them as much. This happens when there's one air crash somewhere as well. The next time you get on an airplane, you're thinking about that one air crash. So think about what happens when people drink. Jocelyn JoJo Schreier is a real girl, went to my high school. That's not her photo. I just Googled 80s yearbook photo. But it is kind of similar to what she looked like. And she was very popular, not a mean girl at all. She was a cheerleader, well-liked by everybody. She got along with everybody. Her parents went on vacation and she had a house party. So imagine what this does to your perception of how many people drink in your high school. Because the party got busted by the cops. So how much are people talking about this the next day? Did you hear about Craig Applehoff? He was puking in the bushes. The cops took him to his house. What? The cops took him to his house? Yeah, his parents got him. Right? Or like Cynthia Dijkstra. I grew up with all Dutch people. So Cynthia Dijkstra and John Vandermeer were making out in her parents' bedroom. They were so hammered. Right? And it just, the gossip goes around. So what happens when you ask how much drinking is going on in your high school? Everybody's drinking. They're not doing a methodical study of every day who's drunk at 5 p.m. and doing a statistical analysis of that. They're just remembering, I remember a lot of incidents of people getting drunk, or maybe there's one person that's drinking a lot, and that seems like a lot. So that certainly happens when we present these results. The other thing is that birds of a feather flock together. If you're drinking a lot, it's unlikely that you're hanging out with teetotalers. And so if you're drinking, you tend to look around at your buddies, and they're all drinking pretty much what you are, and that feels normal. So I'm not drinking, my drinking's not out of control at all. I drink somewhere in the mid-range of my group of extremely alcoholic friends. And I don't know what anyone else is doing because they're doing boring stuff that we don't do. So I don't know who's drinking or not. So how do you handle these objections? What do you do if somebody, you show them the results that came out of their surveys and they object? I think the first thing to do is to remember the hose. Remember the hose analogy. When a hose has been sitting around for a while, the water is kind of warm, tepid, maybe there's a few bugs in it. You don't want to, in my generation, we drank from the hose. But you definitely don't want to drink for the first 30 seconds or so. And that's true when somebody has their first reaction to some of these surveys. The first 5-6 things they're going to say is dirty, tepid water. Oh, that's a bunch of crap. There's no way. Did they take this in Wisconsin? Because in Wisconsin, I'm right in the middle. Or my favorite is always, doesn't matter what the occupation is, their occupation, everybody drinks. Oh, teachers? Oh, man, once it turns 5 o'clock, teachers are all on the sauce. Concrete workers? Man, we drink. It doesn't, lawyers? Oh, my goodness. You've never seen people put back alcohol until you've seen lawyers. You'll get stuff like that. Or I'm Irish. This is just what I have to do. You're just going to get stuff. And accept that. Know that that's going to happen, and don't try and fight it. Just that stuff has to come out. If we're going to get to that cool, clear kind of thoughts, that other stuff's going to have to come out of the hose. The other thing you can do is just reflect their emotions, right? So you're not challenging them. You're not telling them what they're thinking is wrong. Just, yeah, you're surprised by these results. Yeah, I am surprised. Okay. Or, yeah, you're a little suspicious of these results. You're feeling like maybe something's up here and these results aren't right. Yeah, that's how I'm feeling. So just reflect that, and you'd be surprised if you just let the water come out, what happens. At some point, they're going to say something about how their wife doesn't like it, or how they had to call in sick to work, or how they're maybe a little concerned about their health, or they have some relatives and that they don't want to end up like, and they've been wondering about that. So just let that tepid water come out and wait. You're likely to get a mix after a while. This one's kind of sneaky, and you have to be good. You have to be a bit of a good actor, but it absolutely works. It's ethical, and you can do it. You give an amplified reflection. So what you do is you tell the person something that's a little bit more than what they wanted to say. So in the political sphere, it might be, or sphere, you voted for Trump. Yeah, I voted for Trump. So you think he's like a great example of a human being and a great Christian. Well, I didn't say that, right? And they'll back down a little bit. Or with Biden, you voted for Biden, yeah, real clear-headed and he's not tipsy at all. No, I didn't say that. He is a little old. If you say more than what the person is willing to say, they will backtrack for you to clarify what you've said. So if you say, these results seem totally off for you, and you're just trying to accurately reflect what they say, a lot of times they'll walk back what you just said. Well, I wouldn't say they're totally off. I have noticed my tolerance is going up. Okay, now we're off to the races. We got that other stuff out of the hose, and we're starting to hear some clear thinking. Or you could say, the results feel pretty much, they feel pretty much useless in your case as you're looking at this. Well, I don't know about useless. I had an uncle died of cirrhosis, and that was not pretty. And I definitely don't want to go down that route. So if these results may be telling me something, okay. So there's some signal in the noise. You're just reflecting back to them what they hear. But that amplified reflection can help them get to that clean, clear water a little bit more quickly. This one's real handy too, the double-sided reflection. Once you hear someone say something that is both for or against substance use, you just reflect them both back to them. But there's two tricks to it. The first one is use and to connect the two items. If you use but, then you kind of annihilate the first part of that. You just kind of you invalidate that. So use and, or on the one hand, on the other hand. You make them appear equal. But the other trick is that you use the cool, clear thought last. People generally react to the last thing you said. And so when they continue to speak after you've just reflected, they're most likely to pick up the thread of the last thing that you said. So if you say, yeah, these results seem pretty inaccurate for you, at the same time, you've got a couple of uncles that have died of alcohol abuse, and that has you worried. They'll say yes, and they'll follow up on the uncles rather than on the results part. Another example might be you think how you drink now is normal and acceptable, considering you're from Wisconsin, and you don't like the fact that you've missed work due to a hangover. I'm reflecting both back to you. But because I put the clear thought last, you're way more likely to start talking sense afterwards. So again, the two tricks, use and put the clear thought last. Otherwise, you will get more of the tepid water. And then the final thing is you can share what you know about the availability heuristic. You can share what you know about peer groups. Birds of a feather tend to flock together. In Spanish, they say, "Dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres." Tell me who you're with, and I'll tell you who you are. You're hanging out with a bunch of people who drink. You feel normal. You can share those things. It's important to ask. Simply getting that affirmation, hey, can I just share a couple of reasons with you why sometimes these results seem off to people? Yes. Okay. Way more likely to accept whatever you say next. So the result of having this conversation, hopefully, is that you've got somebody who's moved a little bit, who's changed. Maybe they were like, 80-20, I want to keep drinking. And now they're moving more towards 60% of me doesn't want to drink anymore. But we really need to get to a point where someone is giving you at least verbal assent that they want to continue on. If we're moving forward with other interventions after this point and they haven't given us informed consent, it's like wheeling somebody down to the operating room and they're like, nope, don't put those needles in me. And you will get pushback. And you'll have to take a step back and talk with them again about what are their reasons for and against drinking, and try and get to a point where they're feeling like, yeah, I do want to talk about some ways to at least cut down. Maybe I want to talk about some ways to quit. So this is another very typical thing that we do with teens that backfires quite significantly. I call it the castle of the dungeon with concentrated misery. And it's just the idea that we take all the delinquent kids and we put them together in a group. What happens to a petty thief when he goes into prison? He comes out a hardened criminal. The University of Oregon did a brilliant study on this. They studied some kids that went out to a nice camp. Right? They're all a bunch of delinquents. They had video of it. They could actually show the number of times that this kid mouthed off to the instructor and got a laugh from his friends was predictive of how many more arrests he had as an adult. Tell me who you're with and I'll tell you who you are. They feed off each other. My kids, when they were little, if I'd taken them to England, they would have had an English accent. Who you hang out with affects you. And we do this all the time. Oh, we'll get them all together in a group. Or they'll really listen to this guy because he's got all the bona fides of whatever gang he was in before. Some of the guys in my recovery group I like coming to this recovery group because there's normal people in here. My only solution to anything ever was to drink, and now I see what the pastor does when he has a problem. First thing he does, he comes here and he talks about it. They want to pick up things from people that don't have the same problems that they have. And that was one of the things that MST did very well, is it just took people out of these artificial situations and worked with them in their ecology to get change. So this is on the category of maybe not backfiring, but still just probably not that effective. I call it the yoga studio of excessive passivity. And it's propagated a lot by folks in the Al-Anon movement. So you may have heard the 3 C's. I didn't cause it. I can't control it. I can't cure it. And it's repeated like a mantra with the idea that there's nothing I can do. Alcoholism is this guy's problem. He's got to fix it. And I get it. And there's other statements that are correlates of this statement, like they won't change until they're ready. There's nothing I can do until they're ready. Or somebody might say, well, I guess he hasn't hit rock bottom yet. So until he hits rock bottom, nothing we can do. Or even the alcoholic himself will say, it wasn't until I surrendered. They took away my car, they took away my house, took away my wife. It wasn't until I surrendered. That's when things changed. And you'll hear it. If you do any work with recovery, you'll hear this excessively passive approach to other people's drinking. And I want to steelman this argument a little bit because I think there's something to it. So are you familiar with steelmanning an argument? I've learned about this recently by watching way too many YouTube videos. But the idea is that you state your opponent's view so well and so winsomely that your opponent would say, yes, that's what I believe and that's why I believe it. It's the opposite of straw manning, where you go, so what you're saying is, and then you say something absolutely stupid that you can easily knock over. That's why they call it a straw man. So I want to steelman the argument because I do think there's something to this kind of excessively passive approach to other people's addiction. First, you have to maintain sanity. And when you're living or loving somebody who's in addiction, it makes you crazy. I can't figure it out to this day. I can't figure out who comes into resilient. I can't pick which ones are going to get sober. And when they relapse, afterwards, a lot of people go, oh yeah, I saw that coming. I've never heard anybody lay down $5 and say, yeah, Raymond's going to relapse within the next 2 weeks. Afterwards, for sure. We can't predict what's happening, and it makes people crazy. So I understand that you would want to step back from that and give yourself some peace. Additionally, when we have someone that we love and they're in an addiction, you argue with them a lot. And that actually can lead to inadvertently reinforcing the addiction and inadvertently reinforcing the arguing. That the person's drinking triggers your nagging makes them want to go out and drink. And people can get into very habituated patterns where they don't even notice what they're doing. And the end result is one person wins. And it's not always the same person, but we know intermittent reinforcement schedules are the most powerful. So the fact that it works sometimes is something that just reinforces the pattern. And so I understand if people want to step back from that. But there's a type of treatment for addictions called contingency management. It's very effective, and you almost never hear anything about it. They'll just simply tell people, there's like not many classes involved or anything. There's, hey, test, give me 2 clean urine analyses and you get a voucher for $100. And it has the same rate of success as many more intensive programs. And this book is kind of a popularization of that. It's called How to Get Your Loved Ones Sober. And they take kind of this middle approach that, yeah, it will drive you crazy. You need some help, you need some support, and so on. But you can have an effect on somebody else's behavior. We all know this as parents. You can provide rewards and consequences, and it can affect people's behavior. So this comes straight from the book. It's also, this type of therapy has been combined with MST, and they do them together sometimes. But this is a typical interaction. Dan arrives 2 hours late. Holly says, you're late, and bangs the pots and pans. Dan says, knock it off, I've had a hard day. Meh. And then Holly says, I've had a hard day too. You're not the only one that works. And then Dan says, I told you to knock off. And he goes out and he drinks. And I've had many, many men tell me they'll provoke a fight in order to have an excuse. Now I can go drink at you. You were such a battle axe. Of course I'm not going to go home, right? So in this type of treatment, they'll teach people how to interrupt these sequences and do something different. So Dan arrives late. Holly says, glad you're home. Want to eat? He's already confused. No, I want to watch the game. Okay, if you get hungry, heat this up. There was an implicit reward in there because a lot of food doesn't taste as good warmed up, right? So the fact that he showed up late, he already kind of lost something. And then he asks if she wants to watch the game. And she says, no, when you're drinking, I just don't like being around you. She goes and she reads a book. He watches the game by himself. It's not perfect. It's about trade-offs. Holly didn't get what she wanted. She probably wanted him to come home on time and come home sober. She also had to sacrifice the desire to be a little bit righteously angry. And she didn't actually want to read that book. She wanted to do something else. So it's not perfect, but at the same time, she didn't get into an angry fight and have her blood pressure go up. He didn't go back to the bar, and she doesn't have to worry about a DUI and all of the nonsense that comes with that. And it's starting to shape new behavioral patterns. So while I think that I didn't cause it, I can't control it, I can't cure it, there's some validity to it for sure. At the same time, the client's motivation, I think these two things are true. The client's motivation and desire to change is necessary. You can lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink. At the same time, rewards and consequences can be shifted in such a way that a person's motivation and desire changes. I know guys, it was the second DUI. I was, okay. Third one, strike is out. I am now a teetotaler. The consequences did matter. We hear about the ones that it doesn't matter, and they racked up so many DUIs they're in prison for the rest of their life. But it works for many people. Rewards work. If people have something that they're working for, that tends to work. You can even see, there was a researcher, this guy wrote The Biology of Desire, and he showed that there's kind of an expiration date for all types of addictions, that most people are going to do it for X number of years. Smoking was the one that most people will do for the most amount of time. I think it was 23 years. But you think of a pot smoker, a lot of those guys, life starts to happen, they start to get some responsibilities, they put the pot away. And it turns out that's true with most addictions as well. So life forces do impact drinking. Policy, the cost of it, all of those things impact drinking. So we have some things that we can grab onto and we can work with. You can plan the rewards and consequences. And so I want to talk about 2 tools to do that. The first one deals with the ecological conditions. There's some things that are just sort of in the environment that if you look at it and you analyze what's going on in that environment, like, oh, that makes sense. That's why all that drinking is happening. But there's also a sort of motion to things too. There are sequences of behavior that result in drinking. And if we can impact those sequences early enough in the sequence, we can interrupt the sequence and stop the drinking. A lot of times if we're at the 4th, 5th step in that sequence, we're just off to the races. And it's on autopilot, and it's going to happen until the money runs out or whatever the signal is to stop drinking. But there's those 2 things. We've got the ecological conditions, and then we've got these sequences of behavior. So to deal with the ecological conditions, we want to use what's called a fit circle. This comes directly from MST therapy. We analyze what's going on in the environment. It's a behavior analysis tool. And it's concerned with personal factors, for sure, but also ecological ones, most importantly. Those often get overlooked. And it just assumes that there's concrete, logical, logistical things that contribute to drinking. And if we change those conditions, maybe we can change the drinking. One of the key concepts here is that if you block the behavior, then sometimes new behaviors can emerge. So if I'm drinking to deal with grief or trauma and I block the drinking, it's possible that I'm just going to find new ways to handle it. And so rather than attack the grief and the trauma first, we just kind of make it impossible to do the drinking. And many times natural resilience will begin to help the person. And if not, sometimes we need to stop the drinking before we can work on the grief and the trauma issues. So we still need to look at these ecological issues. So this is kind of the format that we use when we use a fit circle. We ask the questions. It's kind of a brainstorming session where we just get what are those conditions. Then we prioritize those conditions. We call them drivers of the behavior. Then we select actions that will change the driver. Not just kind of actions that we like or that we've heard work for other people, but there's a logical connection between that condition and what we're trying to change. Then we make concrete plans to change, and then you review it. You see what happened. And if we need to redo the fit or we need to update the actions, then we do that. And again, I think it's a good idea whenever you introduce something to give a rationale for that. So I wonder if we could look at some of the factors that impact your drinking. If we know what we're dealing with, it's often easier to make a plan of attack. So if we've already had that conversation and the person is now in a space where they're willing to start thinking about changing, that can be all you need to do to get into a fit circle. If you're working with a parent of a teenager that's having some substance abuse issues, you can say, in my experience, teen drinking can be the result of a number of factors. So can we spend a minute brainstorming about those factors? I think it'll help us come up with a plan. I have some questions you can ask here. These are not the definitive list of questions, but it's nice to have that handy. Just do an interview, talk to them, do brainstorming, and maybe you can look back at these questions and see if you missed anything. So this is a fit circle for John's drinking. And John this is pretty much a real person. He was a pharmacist, and he had a very severe drinking problem, and he started sampling from what his pharmacy had to offer in order to help him get through the day. And they found out that pills were missing. He lost his job, and his license was suspended. Fortunately, it triggered for him a discussion with his wife and his pastor, and he's been sober, I want to say, for 3 years now. But this is kind of the fit for his drinking, that it happens when he's driving home after work. There's a Fifth Street convenience store that he drives by. There's no particular rewards for his sobriety. He's an adult, so he has money, he has access to it. It happens every day after work. No one at his church knows that he's drinking, and there's no particular problems, but he is feeling a little anxious. At the end of the day, he's thinking about that next drink. So those are kind of the ecological factors that we come up with when we talk to him. So I want to ask you guys, what would you prioritize here? If the idea is to corral this person and make it difficult to use, what would you prioritize as a driver to change?
I have an answer. I would not. Don't be.
I was given certain names too, that if I got into a Bueller moment, that I could use those names. So jumped ahead a little bit. I just want to point that out. Right? Did you notice that he jumped ahead? That was an action step. That was a concrete plan. We're going to do something fun after work. And it sounds to me like you were working on the driver of no rewards for sobriety, right? Or no? Are you? Okay. So yeah, and that happens too. When you pick a solution, sometimes it will hit various factors, and that probably means that it's a good thing to do. But you have to be kind of a process Nazi sometimes, and you have to pick the driver first, prioritize the driver first. Then because otherwise people do kind of drift off, and they're picking things that maybe intuitively seem right, but you can't follow the through line from the assessment to the action. So yeah, thank you for that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and certainly I talked to a woman 2 weeks ago. The difference between the time she relapsed and she didn't, money in her pocket. Dad sent me money for the baby's diapers. And then she had another time, went by the same store, didn't get it, she didn't have any money. It's a concrete logistical way to stop it from happening. Yeah, any other ideas? Good, very good ideas. I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead a little bit here. So these are some of the criteria that I use to kind of look at the drivers and prioritize them. This comes straight from MST. What's the biggest bang for your buck, right? Is there one that if we change this one, it's going to be a lot harder to drink? Then let's do that one. Also, what are we most afraid to change? Family systems, as well as human beings, want to be in homeostasis, even if it's a crappy one. And so if they're afraid to change something, it might mean that that's really going to rock the system, and maybe it needs to be rocked. So let's look at the one that you're afraid to change. Ripple effects. We talked a little bit about the kind of the solution that you had ripple effects on a couple of different drivers. Sometimes there's just a logical sequence. If we're going to do X, we have to do this first. And then sometimes people are real demoralized and you just want to get early success. There's something we can do that's the equivalent of a 5-pound weight, and you can lift that now, and later we'll go on to the heavier ones, but can we do something that will work? So those are kind of the criteria that we use to pick the drivers. And then these are the two that I prioritized. I may not be right, okay? These are experiments that we're running. We run the experiment and we see what happened, but these were the two that I hit on. I hit on the anxiously because palms a little sweaty towards the end of work, heart's racing a little bit. What does that tell me? What do I suspect? That you may have some dependence to this alcohol, and I don't want to proceed too quickly without finding out how severe that dependence might be, because that can be dangerous for you if you just go cold turkey. So that was definitely one that I picked. And the Fifth Street, driving by that convenience store, yeah, I would like to find another route for him for sure. So these are the actions that I selected. I said, get checked by your doctor, buddy. There's medication that can help with cravings. I've also worked with people that they talked to their doctor. This doctor gave them a titration plan to go from the massive amount they were drinking down to almost nothing and then quit. And they did it, but they couldn't sleep. So talk to your doctor. You could have anxiety popping up. You could have depression popping up. Let's get your doctor involved in this. And I at least want him to check off that if you're going to go cold turkey, you're not going to have a stroke or go into some kind of seizure or something. So when I hear anxious, I definitely want to explore that more. So go see your doctor. Mindfulness, that's pretty helpful with anxiety. And then call a friend. So if you're feeling that anxiety, who are you going to reach out to through some text messages to let them know, I'm feeling pretty anxious this evening. Can you call me, make sure I made it home all right, or whatever the situation is. And then Fifth Street, to me, the best option would be to have a relative pick him up from work the first few times and just interrupt that cycle altogether. Again, you get into the autonomy issues, and maybe I'm not going to have my son drive me. Okay, my second best is drive a different route and get some flowers for your wife on that route. That's a totally different pattern. That's opposite intention of what you were doing. Give her a gift when she gets home instead of the gift of you under the influence. And it serves both purposes, right? He goes somewhere else, changes the dynamic between he and his wife. So then we want to make concrete plans. For me, this is the most difficult because I tend to be the more laissez-faire kind of person. You told me you're going to do it, okay. But you really want to nail down who's doing it, what are they doing, by when, as evidenced by what. And just really nail that down so there's no escape hatch whatsoever. And you've got to get somebody who's pretty committed to be able to do that. But when you do that, you can take those sort of nebulous intentions that I had, and you can turn them into something that looks like this. You've got John. We'll get an evaluation at the hospital on Thursday by 6 p.m. as evidenced by the visit summary. Very, very concrete. And each one of these has that level of specificity. And then what you do is you check in on your homework. How did it go? When we checked in on John, he did pretty well. He talked to the doctor cleared him, said it was okay to go cold turkey. He did the mindfulness practice. He had a little sticky note where he was going to write a little mark down each time he did it. He did that. And he got a friend involved, and he told the friend on a scale of 1 to 10 how triggered he was feeling for the last 2 hours of work. So that went really, really well. On the Fifth Street thing, it was incomplete in terms of his son driving him. I don't want to do that. I don't want to bring my son into this. I'm a grown man. I can fix this. And then he pretty much did the driving the other route thing, except for one night. A buddy from work asked for a ride home, and they're drinking buddies, and they drove by the store, and then they had a few, and then he got home late. And that's typical, that you're going to see some things that worked, some things that didn't work, and then you've got to reassess. All right, so it worked. It mostly worked. What can we do now to kind of close those gaps a bit more? And what we did is we did a fit on that one that was partially complete. And the fit on that was that, well, I haven't really gone all in. I haven't told anybody at church. So that gives me kind of an out. I didn't want to involve my son. That just seems kind of embarrassing. And Lenny needed a ride home. I don't want to look like a jerk to Lenny. And then he had few rewards for sobriety. So based on this new information, we come up with a new set of prioritized drivers and actions. I prioritized, right or wrong, I don't know. No one at church knows. Lenny needing a ride, and there's no rewards for drinking. Then I came up with some concrete steps to make those actions very, very observable and repeatable, and to make sure that they're done. And those included, for example, if Lenny needs a ride home, maybe I can say, I have to get home because my wife's making something special. Maybe I can take Lenny home with me. We have a home-cooked meal, and then I drop him off, and that interrupts the pattern. My wife knows I'm leaving, and I'm going to come home sober right after that. And then also to have some kind of a steak dinner at the end of the week or maybe throughout the week there's dinners to celebrate that he came home, but there's some rewards involved in his doing something differently. So this is interesting too. This comes from MST. They call this a general fit on teen substance use. As they've looked at all the risk and protective data out there, they've come up with certain factors that are just come up over and over again in the literature. So on the top there, you see desire for new experience. That's huge, especially for teens. They want to do stuff that's new. We talked about all the reasons why thinking something is dangerous is just going to kind of make them want to do it more. Family drug use comes up, access and availability, and then all the things that go with that are things that we want to highlight and make changes in for teen substance use. There's genetic factors, not a whole lot we can do there. So it shows up in the literature, we know it's a factor. There may not be a whole lot we can do about that. So we want to go for the things that are amenable. Lack of positive parental support is huge. Wanting to deal with problems. So finding ways that kids can have a mentor or do something else where they can deal with their problems. Lack of positive peer support is huge again. When we talk about birds of a feather flocking together and the fact that we all kind of end up looking like the people that we hang out with, we want to start to change who that kid's peer group is. And there can be a whole series of interventions involved in that because the kid may not have the social skills to hang out with the more pro-social people. He may have legitimately gotten kicked out of certain activities. And so we need to find ways to work with the adults to structure it in such a way that the kid can participate in those activities. So I'm just going to briefly go over a sequence. I'll show you one sequence and then let's do some questions. So a sequence is similar to the fit circle, but again, it follows action steps. So the order of operations here is you complete the sequence, which is you just find out, you go blow by blow, what happened during your last relapse or what happens typically when you use. And I like to use sticky notes because you can change the order when you find out, oh, this actually happened here, and you get a really good sequence of what happened. So it can look like this, where you've just got sticky notes all over the table showing what happened during the last relapse. I talked to a guy in treatment, and this is the summary of that larger thing that we looked at. We found that while he's at work, he's already starting to fantasize about Friday. And for him, this is all about kind of savoring his pleasure at the end of the week after having worked hard. So he's thinking about it while he's working. When he gets off work on Friday and he's got that money, he wants to have a good meal. And he spent some time in Wisconsin, so for him that was Culver's. And let's have a good meal. And then he's telling me I'm trying to slow down the drunk. So I go to a bar, and it's got to be the right kind of bar. I like the way that the surface of the bar feels. There's an attractive bartender that I can chat up. That's good. I'm trying to drink as slowly as possible. Then he goes from the bar to a movie. And at the movie, he's got a couple in his backpack, and there's some movie theaters in Arizona that you can drink. He says, sometimes I'm able to get through the whole movie and just watch the movie and drink. Usually about halfway through the movie, I'm pretty drunk and I kind of stumble out. Then he would stumble out of the movie and he's hanging out with homeless people on the street. Eventually he looks for a place to crash, and he finds a place to crash and sleeps it off. In the morning, he's got a couple of cans in his backpack. And this is a pattern that has gone on for years for him. So when we looked at the sequence, we realized we had to intervene early in the sequence because it was so habitual for him. And we wanted to take these ideas about anticipation and the buildup and the savoring and the getting in the mood for this. We talked about how, sports figures, they have all these routines and rituals that they go through. We wanted to include that in there. And so for him, what he decided to do was, well, I don't drink when I take care of my grandkids. And I'm going to make that the best weekend ever. The way we make the popcorn, what kind of toppings they put on the popcorn. I'm going to take pictures of my grandkids. I'm going to have gifts for them when I get there. He's going to turn it into this whole kind of ritual thing that he can do instead of the drinking. And it seems to be working for him right now. There were a couple other things in his weekend that were like that. He likes to help set up for church and so on. And we just planned those activities, and that was his way of doing something different than this sequence. And this is someone who's just chronically relapsed, but I want to say he's on like week 5 right now of not drinking. And that's pretty incredible if you know his history. So I'll stop there and maybe take some questions.
And 10 to 16-year-olds, what are some of like the key tips for creating that resiliency that they can return to when they're a little bit older?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and prevention works, right? So it's a very good question. I would say again, like, let's not congregate all these kids together in the same program. I think the best thing we can do for this kid is introduce them to socially adept peers and let them see what those kids do when they're frustrated. Kids, they shape each other's behavior. Just hanging out with some kids that have some social skills is going to rub off on this kid. I think that's huge, and allow the powerful effect of your peer group to work on this kid, knowing that he probably doesn't have the skills to be there and he might get rejected. And when kids get rejected, then they gravitate towards the delinquent peer set. So having supports in place to help him be successful and be able to have some interactions with kids that are healthy. You know, we want to kind of normalize and put them in general population, and as much as we can get them to experience those experiences. That's what's going to build their resilience, much more than any skill that we can give them. They're just going to pick it up by osmosis, the same way kids pick up accents and music and hairstyles from each other. He's going to pick up from his peers appropriate ways of acting and patterns of acting that don't lead to substances. Yeah.
Jason, I really appreciated this presentation across the board for many of the components that you just laid out. And I would like the audience to know here too, for the size of the audience, more of your resilient recovery gospel initiative. If you could actually put some resemblance to that, so everyone
Sure.
understands that.
Yeah. I have a slide that kind of summarizes it. So this is kind of our conceptualization of our part of addiction. Addiction is a multi-component animal that straddles the legal stratosphere, socio-emotional, policy, all kinds of different things. But we're looking at the spiritual aspect of it. So we believe people use substances, they feel shame. When you feel shame, you lie, hide, and cover up. It's the first thing Adam and Eve did. Lie, hide, and cover up. Feel hopeless, get isolated. So now you've got this thing happening, you know, inside your body, and the devil's attacking you and telling you you're unforgivable. The only way to get any kind of sense of normalcy is to drink again. So it's a powerful drive to drink. So what we want to do is we want to interrupt that cycle. We've drank, we felt shame, but now we're going to confess. In a group setting, we're going to confess what we've done, what alcohol has done to us, what we've done to other people. And we have a moment in Resilient where there's a private confession as well. And then we ask people to believe that they are forgiven. And belief in that forgiveness changes the dynamic. That's really the power behind the change. We really focus on that confession belief as a core component. One, because we've got an hour for this meeting, but also confession and absolution are part of many different backgrounds, church services. There's a confession and absolution. It's ancient Christian practice. There's a private confession and absolution in the Lutheran hymnal. We use that with people too. If there's something you can't confess here in the group, I'll sit down with you and we'll talk about that, and we'll go through that private confession, and you will confess your belief in that forgiveness. Also, Jesus, when he went out and he preached, repent and believe in the gospel. That's that pattern. Confess what you've done wrong and believe in the gospel. My pastor added those last 2 points there, that that's what gives the power to change, but also that we're changing as we extend grace to other people. It starts to become very, very inconsistent to not extend that grace to myself. So our belief and our faith in God's forgiveness of us is huge. So that's kind of what we do. I can show you briefly what one of the lessons looks like. They all have these sections where there's a verse. We talk about the verse, and then we ask some questions, and we go around the room. In this one, it's a psalm crying out to God. Then we talk about this guy who didn't ask for help. Then we ask people, what led you to ask for help? And when you do that, you start to get confessions. Like this guy says, I told myself my kids would never see me drunk like I saw my dad, but it's happening a lot lately. And that was the trigger for me. This lady just couldn't do it on her res. Just couldn't do it at home. Failed. I reached out and asked for help. This guy ended up in a psych ward, and he still didn't quit. It was when he got pancreatitis, and it almost killed him when he finally reached out for help. And then this joker, he apologized to his daughter, and she just rolled her eyes and said, I've heard that before. And that's a powerful, and I knew when I said it, I had no hope that I wasn't going to do it again. That was powerful for me. And then when I saw other people in a circle get honest, I was like, oh, that dude just said some stuff. Maybe I'll share what's going on too. So it becomes like, you see how these are a confession based on that question? And then we end that with where we read and we ask people to do a private confession in prayer. And then somebody stands up and they read a gospel message that assures them that that thing which they just confessed, they are forgiven for. And we tend to highlight Jesus' active obedience of the very thing we just talked about. It's not present in this one, but we find that's important for people to really personalize that sense of forgiveness. So, oh, Jesus was patient in my behalf. He did what I couldn't do. It tends to be powerful to people. So that tends to feature highly in our gospel pronouncements. And we just do this cycle over and over again. And each lesson is kind of a hypothesis. Was trying to be a big man or a big woman part of your drinking? Yeah, I wanted to drink the expensive stuff. Were you trying to find happiness and you just kept getting sadder and sadder? Did you want an escape and life kept getting worse? So each lesson kind of has a theme, and people share whether or not that theme contributes to their drinking. And we do this in our church, in a setting with the community, and then we go into rehabs and we run these meetings in the rehabs as well. So that's a little bit about resilient recovery. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.